All right.
He's a very nice person.
Yeah, he is a nice person, and he's very talented and good.
And the main thing was that after the reverse surgery, she was able to make him,
Uh-huh.
so to do his job properly.
She woke up at the end. That's perfect. Good.
And I think he might be the same one who did her anesthesiology when she had her original surgery.
Really? That's unusual. Okay.
But,
Excellent.
you know, it's interesting that, you know, he's M. Stafford, and then M. Stafford, who's also a quarterback in the NFL.
I wasn't aware of
I
that.
think Matt.
Oh,
Stafford-
Marshall's. Yeah.
Yeah, Matt Stafford.
Matt Stafford, yes.
Quarterback.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. He's actually, he's like the first string guy,
oh, okay.
I think, isn't he? For somebody, I've heard the name.
Oh,
LA Rams,
Yeah.
traded from the Lions this year
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
for Jared Goff and a whole bunch of first-round picks.
First round picks. Okay. We give all of our best players away for a 6th round pick or something.
Yeah.
Yes, they're better negotiators in Detroit, apparently.
But it's interesting, you know, in football, they trade players for players and stuff. In baseball, there's always that one guy who's a player to be named later.
Right.
And he gets, you know,
Yeah.
he's always included.
I know, I got my name when I was born, so.
Yeah. Probably a little bit before you were born.
No, it wasn't until I was born, so.
Well,
Especially because they thought I was going to be a girl.
is that right?
Yes.
You were supposed to be a girl. Huh?
And I was going to be named Cody. And then when I was born a boy, they were like, oh, well, Cody works for a boy too.
That's right. That's right.
Because there was Commander Cody in some sci-fi show, which set me up to being a geek.
Hopefully they weren't too disappointed.
Not that they've ever admitted.
Well,
Yeah.
Your brother was probably disappointed because
Well, after a little bit, my brother asked, when does he go back to the hospital?
he traded in.
Yes, yeah.
Good.
They're okay to borrow.
So, girls talk about weddings and marriages, and so it came up in conversation that we don't have a wedding planner at First Pres.
Yes, that is true.
So therefore, you can't get married here.
You technically can, but yes, we are in the market for a new wedding coordinator.
Okay. Who used to help
The last person
Marion
was
Becker?
Cindy Kern.
Oh.
So she's
Okay. I couldn't remember that.
stepping down, but if we find someone, she'll
All right.
help them get up to speed.
Got it.
But yes, we can still pull it off. It's just not as it takes a little more from the pastors to pull off.
Well, I have said, if, that became an issue, you could always bring your own wedding planner,
Yes, that's also
they can
yeah.
figure stuff out.
Yep.
I would not sweat the small stuff.
That one's on my list, but it is not the top of my list.
Exactly. Right.
Not even in the middle of my list.
Well, okay, I gotta tell them that.
But if there is a wedding request,
Yeah,
we will
that's right.
make it work. Especially if it's like a member, then
Right.
we will find a way to make a wedding work.
Right.
That I can guarantee.
Yep.
Well, we are in Matthew chapters 8 through 10. And everyone here has it memorized, right?
All three chapters.
All 3 chapters. Yes.
I don't have the words memorized, but have the good title memorized.
Right. You even know the author?
Author unknown.
Yes. This one's author Matthew.
I have several
It sounds
versions
like
of the
one of
Bible
those things
on
they
my
have
phone,
on
but,
when they make fun of
I like paper.
Jeopardy.
Right.
Who is the author of Matthew?
This disciple of Jesus authored the book of Matthew. Who is Matthew?
You said Matthew 7?
Matthew 8.
8.
8, 9, and 10.
What did he eat?
Hmm?
What did he eat?
Lamb chops.
What did Sherry Lewis have to say about that?
Yeah, but is this the Matthew that is talked about in these chapters?
Yes. So we get to meet Matthew.
So how did he
In his
write
own
all
book.
the stuff beforehand, before he got there?
He heard the stories.
Okay, so he was a good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, same with like any of them. Like, it's not like Luke knew the story of Jesus's birth unless Jesus told him, and Mary, was around the disciples as well.
But it's the same Matthew.
It is the same Matthew.
Okay.
Yes.
Since he was a tax collector, he probably was good with reports.
Yes. Yes. Or at least money.
Yeah.
And in those days, which we'll talk about, extortion was also a critical skill for a tax collector. So up to this point in the Gospel of Matthew, you kind of get Jesus's teaching. So we have Matthew 5 through 7 is the Sermon on the Mount, the most famous sermon. A lot of the the Beatitudes. Blessed are you when, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are all of those. You have Jesus doing a lot of stuff from the Old Testament about interpretation of the Old Testament, where he says, "You've heard it said, but I say to you." So you've heard it said, love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies and bless those who persecute you. That kind of stuff, where he gives this, this huge teaching. It's a sermon he probably gave multiple times, because we have a version of it in Luke that's very similar, but it's on the plain, like on a level ground instead of the mount. So the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain are very similar. And so this was probably kind of a common riff that one, the best hits of Jesus. Good album. So Matthew, has the birth story. So you have, the Christmas miraculous birth. You have his incredible teaching, mind-blowing, no one saw this coming teaching. And then you have 8 through 10, which is our section today, Jesus' miraculous power and his miracles and his healings and doing things that no one else could do. So Matthew is really setting up Jesus' authority and also evolving the concept of Son of Man. So you have two technical terms in the New Testament, and they're in the Old Testament as well, but they're used differently. So Jesus refers to himself in the Gospel of Matthew as the Son of Man. You'll also see, the Son of God. But in our text today, you see this evolution of the Son of Man from, people originally, like the original writings would lead you to believe kind of, Messiah, but earthly king kind of person. And so Son of Man starts off with this teacher, this rabbi, this great rabbi. But now the evolution of the term takes a turn to the divine. So that's what's happening over 8, 9, and 10, is the establishment of Jesus' miraculous authority, or the kingdom demonstrated through his miracles. So you have in 8, Jesus cleansing a leper. And in those times, leprosy, was a big deal, where it was probably not the diseases that we today call leprosy. They were probably a different set of skin diseases, highly contagious. So that's one of the differences. And again, it was probably a family of skin diseases that was going on. So at the time, you had to be, keep your distance because it was highly contagious. And they had to, call out leper, 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 so that everyone could get out of your way. I guess if you really wanted to get through a crowd quickly, you could just call out leper, There's too much traffic. Leper, leper.
Play the leper card.
Yes, exactly.
Can you name some of those diseases that are contagious but not leprosy?
I don't
I mean,
know.
like psoriasis is not, it's common, but it's not contagious.
Yeah, well, and that's what's different. Hello.
Okay, well, if you don't know that.
I don't know. I just know that they said it's probably not.
I could probably Google it.
Yes. What was biblical leprosy? And you'll probably get, but it's going to be speculative as well.
Right,
But
sure.
people who know medicine better than I do have speculated better than I could. So yeah, that'd be interesting. Part of it, he healed. We're in Matthew chapter 8, by the way.
But it must have been something disease that was pretty broad or contagious, because I mean, they had rules going all the way back, right?
Yes.
You were outside the walls.
Yes.
You were really different. And it's physical. It wasn't like some mental thing.
Yeah, it was physical and visible. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about leprosy. It's the uplifting topic of the day. So.
We're in leprosy.
Yeah, everyone's favorite.
Leprosy for 200.
Yes. So also the Jewish, concept of cleanliness comes in, and there were all these rules about who could participate and when you could participate in the temple and in the sacrifices. And so, interestingly, like when I was in Jerusalem and at the Temple Mount, there were all of these tiny, little places to bathe. And so those were ritual baths to cleanse yourself before you would go up to the temple. It was like a little cottage industry of the little ritual baths. So a leper with highly contagious skin disease, they didn't want in the shared ritual baths for some reason. And so that's part of this whole, like from a modern perspective, we could see the health benefits of many of the cleanliness rules based on how they kind of approached the temple. But that also meant that you were cut off from the community. So actually, like in a little bit, Jesus, the faith of the centurion is in here, where the centurion says, I've got someone who's sick, and Jesus says, okay, I'll come with you. And he says, I know what it is to command. You've got authority. Just say the word. I don't need to impose upon you to come to my house. Well, part of that is the centurion is actually being very considerate, because if Jesus had gone to his house, he would have been in the house of a Gentile, and he would have been considered ritually unclean. So to go heal that person in person, he would have been excluded from the temple for a period of time. So the centurion was knowledgeable about Jewish customs as well. Also, not related to this, but an interesting part of history and God working things together. In the book of Acts, Acts chapter 2, when Peter gives his sermon, and it says, 3,000 people were baptized that day. They were on the steps of the Temple Mount. So if you were going to baptize 3,000 people in a hurry, what would you need? A whole bunch of baths, right? Mm-hmm. So they were standing in the one place where you could rapidly baptize thousands of people. Just kind of funny, interesting to see how God uses this arc of history, to found the church, and in ways that weren't comprehended. It's not like anyone planned that, right? So I just that was a moment that stood out to me. Yeah. No. Let's get baptized. We're going to walk 3 miles this way. Or there's sewage. These are our options. Or hundreds and hundreds of ritual baths. Oh, we happen to be right there.
By the dung gate, right?
Yes, yeah, that's the best place. The dung gate is definitely the best place to bathe. Yes, and the horse gate. Their middle names? I was wondering about that, but I was trusting Eleanor got it right. Okay, so
just remind me before you go over their names.
let's get it. We got a pen right there.
I switched it out in here.
Oh, you already got it?
Yeah.
But Bill is going to announce them, so he's got his script right there. So
These are the most important ones.
so we might.
See all the synergy you're getting here?
Yes, this is good. I'm going to double check our certificates and the books and.
I'm wondering if I emailed you wrong, like I know my own children's names.
If we did get them backwards on everything, we will redo all the plates for all of those. And Yes, we will get that right. My dad was ordained. My dad's name is Scott, and he was ordained as Steve. Throughout his entire life, he's been called Steve at random moments by pastors, including when he was being ordained as an elder.
Does he
As
look
a,
like a Steve?
I don't know.
as a Scot, though, I always say if I had $1 for every time I was called Steve.
Really, that's just a thing.
Yeah, no.
I'll have to tell him that. He'll get a kick out of that.
Seriously, it'd be a lot of money.
The next time he's here, you can commiserate on the Steveness of your name.
I don't know what it is, but that's, I can call Jim and
I get Corey a lot, but I understand that. But Steve and Scott, those are not adjacent to me. It's been for him too. So there you go. So we'll check. So yeah, if those aren't right, we'll take them back, and then we'll give your presents to you later. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It took me a minute. I read it, and it looks right enough. I was like, wait.
Yeah. No, I was looking at that this morning, and I went, I thought I'd heard it the other way, but
It means I emailed you correctly because I was second guessing myself.
yeah. But I didn't go back and look. I just went, huh.
I already printed at that point.
Yeah, yes. The die is cast. But we'll get it right verbally. And I'll change it on my script up there. It's in my Bible. But anyway, so the other thing is for a leper to be restored, the priest actually has to examine them to make sure that their leprosy is completely gone. Again, if you think about those shared ritual baths, you understand why the priest needs to confirm we're not spreading this thing. But so when Jesus heals the leper here in chapter 8, verse 4, Jesus said, "See that you say nothing to anyone," which they never do.
Yeah.
They never.
He tries that.
Yeah, he tries. But go, except in the Gospel of John. That's what's fascinating about the different perspectives from the different writers of the Gospels, because in John, he's demonstrating, it's written from the perspective of demonstrating his power and his divine power. And so over and over again, it's like these signs, and the I am statements. I am the way, the truth, and the life, So in John, it's much more about his public ministry. And then in Mark and Matthew, you see a lot of this, don't tell anyone. So both of these were aspects of his ministry, but you see that the different gospel writers kind of have a different point to make. And Luke talks about this, that he's ordering things, for a particular point. It's in Luke chapter 1. He tells you that. So all of them are arranged from a perspective of trying to address a particular thing. Like they wanted you to get certain things out of the story of Jesus. So they're not intended to be chronologically arranged. And at the time of, like, we would write things chronologically because of the concept of a historical biography. But for their time of writing, that would not have been the norm. So it's not that they got things wrong. It's that their genres of telling this story were thematically arranged rather than chronologically arranged until it's important, like the order of resurrection and cross. Like that matters, right? So he was resurrected and then crucified. What? So that's just conceptually. But in Matthew, and you see it in Mark as well, he tries to tell them, don't tell anyone. Then he says, go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. So what Jesus is doing there is restoring them to the community. They've been restored in their body, but until they've been examined by the priest and made the offering, they aren't considered clean by the community, and people would still run away from them because they aren't certified. They don't have their vax card, right? So he restores their body and restores them to community. We already talked a little bit about the faith of the centurion. But again, that's just droning on and on.
They're gonna have to get louder now.
Right. We might have to close the door back there. For anyone online, there's bagpipes if you can't hear it. It's Kirkin of the Tartan Sunday.
That was pretty good.
It might have been a little more Irish, but we'll go with it. That didn't help at all, but we'll just be louder. Yeah. So on since I'm McConnell and we don't know if I'm Scottish or Irish, on St. Patrick's Day I'm Irish, and on Kirkin of the Tartans I'm Scottish. So.
Your McConnell was MCCLN, right?
Well, we don't know because mine was spelled phonetically at some point. So it's MCCONAL, which is not a traditional spelling anywhere in the world. So the prevailing theory that I've heard is that at one point, one of the wild, wayward McConnell clan people ran away and may not have known how to spell his name, and so did it as close as he could. So, and since they were murderers and thieves, and eventually drug dealers, that fits. And my grandmother's a James, Jesse James. So I've got lots of interesting people on that side of the family. But anyway, I'm Scottish today. Oh, so the interesting thing about the Centurion is that, so the concept of the Messiah was very Jewish, and again, very temporal. It was very focused on being an earthly king with political independence from any ruling powers. That was the concept of the new David, which obviously Jesus was drastically different than the expectation, which is part of the reason they wanted to kill him. So don't mess up people's expectations, or they try to kill you. That's what I learned from that. But placing the Centurion here, especially before even the calling of the disciples, you see the kind of the precursor of the expansion of the gospel to the Gentiles. And it's placed really early on, and he's praised for his faith. So it's this very interesting message. And it's a message that people attack Jesus for frequently. Like when he goes into his hometown and he reads from the scroll of Isaiah, and then he says, "This has been fulfilled in your hearing." And then he says, "I'm not going to perform miracles here." And then they try to throw him off a cliff. Part of that is what he skipped in the reading was the part about judgment on the Gentiles. So when they were waiting for okay, here comes the fire and brimstone and the vengeance part, and he stops. They're like, and so he, again, you can start seeing the glimpses of the expansion of the gospel to the Gentiles in these different parts, but people don't like it. So that's one of the interesting things that Matthew does in placing the story of the Centurion so early on.
Does it also say, though, I mean, when it talks about, when he heard what the Centurion said, he was amazed. Said to the followers around him, he said, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. So to me, it almost says, too, that and what the Centurion, he didn't know all about the Jewish laws, and then if he did, he probably thought it was more complicated. It did obviously apply to him, but he had the faith.
Yeah.
So it's almost cutting through all the other stuff, right? But that's kind of the new covenant.
Right, yeah.
It's starting to come out.
Yeah, definitely foreshadowing of the new covenant and kind of the fulfillment and reinterpretation of what all this Old Testament stuff means. And I've shared this before, that like it's not like Jesus like blows up the Old Testament. He said, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. But some things like the sacrificial laws, they find their endpoint in Jesus, and other things like the nature of the Sabbath, or the nature of Israel versus Jews versus Gentiles, those things get sent off in a totally different direction than people expected. But it's not that. So it's like the interpretation of what was said in the Old Testament. Jesus says, you guys were way off. Here's where I was really going with that. So it's not that he undoes it. He just says it means something totally different than you expected. This one's a hard one. So we're still in chapter. There's so much in all these chapters. We're not going to get to all of it. But chapter 8, verses 18 through 22. Now, when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. Side note, in Gospel of Matthew, the other side means he is crossing the Sea of Galilee, either to go to the Decapolis, which is like the Greek-Roman side, or coming back to the Capernaum side, which is the Jewish side. So to the other side means they're crossing the Sea of Galilee between Gentile territory and Jewish territory. And a scribe came up. He was in Capernaum at this time. So crossing over, he's now going over to the Gentile side. A scribe came up and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead." It's weird, right? It's a theological term. What do you make of that? How does that strike you?
When he says, "Let the dead bury their own dead," I don't think the dead who are supposed to be doing the burying are really dead people there. Not followers or something like that, outcasts. Not trying to read, but I think he's really referring to dead people buried, other dead people.
Dead to the Lord, maybe?
So it could be a metaphor.
I've not really thought of it before.
Another metaphor would be like,
Except in golf, if there's a ball coming at you. Yeah, there's also Jewish hyperbole is a genre. And you see this sometimes, like Jesus does this sometimes, and you see it a lot in Psalms and Proverbs, where something is stated to its most extreme version. So yes, the prevailing wisdom is that Jesus is not talking about reanimating zombies to bury people. As far as we know. Maybe he did, but we're not aware of that. But saying basically the first person, he says, foxes have holes, birds have nests, Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So let's start there. That's the easier one. So what do you think that means?
Home is not on earth.
Home is not on earth, yeah. And what does it mean for his followers?
Their home's up there too.
Yeah, right. Well, and why would he say this to someone? The guy's saying, "I'm going to follow you."
I think he's trying to say here's what you're getting into. Here.
Right.
This is going to be a lot different than you maybe think it's going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a
You
cost
gotta be
here.
able to- yeah, you're going to be able to do the sacrifice. Yeah.
You're not going to be comfortable if you follow me, literally. I keep going to the other side. We're wandering around. You're not going to be comfortable. Yeah. And you see, that's not in this text, but like elsewhere, you got like the rich young ruler, and who comes to Jesus and says, "I've kept all the laws," and Jesus says, "Great job. One thing you lack: go and sell all your possessions and give it to the poor." And it says he went away sad, for he had a great many possessions. Now, that's not generally interpreted as a general prescription for all of us. It is usually seen as kind of like this person here. He's speaking to the thing in that rich young ruler, the thing that he valued more than his faith was his money. And in the foxes have holes, birds have nests, Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He is probably speaking to the thing that this scribe values, which is home or comfort. Could be either one. And this other guy, let me first go and bury my father. It's a weird way to get at it, but again, probably thematically addressing if you are more loyal to your family than to God, or more loyal to your traditions than to God, that's just as much a problem as if it's comfort or wealth. And Jesus says other kind of weird things like that, like when Mary and his brothers come up and they say, you know, oh, your mother and brothers are here, and he says, no, these are my brothers and sisters, as those who do the will of God. So he has these kind of weird things to us that would seem like disrespectful, or you know, if you had a kid who said that, probably wouldn't be your top day, right? that wouldn't be high up on my list. But thematically, it is probably trying to get at your number one allegiance is supposed to be God. Now, that also should lead you to your commitments, you know, to family and others, but they have to be placed in proper order. That's generally what is thought that Jesus is getting at with these tough teachings, these specific tough teachings. So you don't answer this out loud, but you can think about this. What would Jesus challenge you on? What do you have higher ranked? You can contemplate that. And then next week, we'll all take guesses on what Bill's top thing is. With Packers written on his mouth. Although you've come to many of church meetings, you know, even during Packers games. So we'll give you credit. We also have Jesus calms a storm. Heals the man with demons, and it goes into the pigs. Any of these stories you want to, there's a lot of stories here. We're not going to get them all. So if there's any of these you want to chat more on.
Well, I thought on the pig one, it was interesting because he did all this, and I know in the other Gospels it has the same story. A couple of them where this guy or Legion or whatever the guy's name was healed, and it was great. And you'd think everybody'd be happy, but since he killed all the pigs, he'd run him back out, send him back to
Yes.
home, so to speak. Said you can't hurt commerce.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
That's in the book of Acts
you
too.
just can't hurt business.
Yeah. When they were being successful in the book of Acts, and then the silversmiths were worried that their trade in idols would go down, so they fought against the Christians.
Can't hurt business.
Yeah, if you hurt business, someone's coming after you. Yeah, it's a weird story about the demons running into the pigs and the pigs running off the cliff. It's weird. That's another theological term. Well, the pigs weren't kosher, so maybe it's symbolic too. Matthew chapter 9, the healing of the paralytic. This is another one that you see versions of multiple times, like Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. You have Mark's version of that. And then you have it here in Matthew. I think there's one in Luke too. But it's interesting to me to see the stories that get in a whole bunch of Gospels, because they were like, that really stood out, right? It's kind of like if you're at a funeral and people are telling, stories of the same day because it really stood out to them. So these are the moments that really stood out to them for particular reasons. And this one stood out. It's an interesting one because it's a paralytic. This is Matthew chapter 9. It's verse 1. Getting into a boat, he crossed over again, came to his own city, that was Capernaum, and behold, some people brought to him a paralytic lying on a bed. And when Jesus saw their faith, aka the people who brought the paralytic to him, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven." And behold, some of the scribes said to themselves, "This man is blaspheming," because only God would be able to forgive sins. And side note there, in the Jewish sacrificial system, most of the sacrifices and offerings that you see are for things that you did and you did on purpose. Did accidentally. So if you did something on purpose, only God could forgive you, really. And that was the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and you had the scapegoat, which is the goat that you send out, and the sins, the intentional sins of the community are laid upon this scapegoat with the hope that God will accept that offering and forgive them and choose to forgive them. So there was this concept that offerings were good for I'm messed up, but I didn't really mean to. And also there were just ritual offerings. But then if I meant to, Father, forgive them, they know exactly what they're doing. That kind of thing. It was God's choice, and that was your only way. I'm painting with a broad brush here, but you get the concept. So for Jesus to say your sins are forgiven is taking the place of God. So that's why the scribes and the Pharisees didn't like that. That was verse 3. Verse 4. But Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, "Why do you think evil in your hearts? For which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven, or to say rise and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man," there's that term, "has authority on earth to forgive sins." Again, the expansion of the term Son of Man. He then said to the paralytic, "Rise, pick up your bed, and go home." And he rose and went home. And when the crowd saw it, they were afraid, and they glorified God, who had given such authority to men. It's an interesting story, and some of the parallels. There's a little differences in the details, which could mean this happened multiple times, or could just mean they had different details. In Mark, he's in a house, and they dig through the roof.
Yeah, that's the one where
Yeah,
they
that's dramatic.
cut line, and pop them down.
Yes, yeah. But in all of them, the same broad strokes exist, that it's a paralytic, and I think does even say he was born. I think in Mark it says that he was born that way. So there's a difference in the ancient world and even today, about if you're born blind versus your eyes just fail over time. Like that's different, right? So, or if you're born, without an arm versus you lost an arm. So, and some of these, some things can be cured if they happen later in life, but can't be cured if they happen at birth. So, we see that a few times. So, in all of these stories, there's friends, and Mark it says 4, that carry a paralytic on a bed and present him to Jesus. Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. The religious authorities get mad. Then he heals him in his body. And in all of them, it says, take your bed, take your mat with you and go. And that has always struck me as a fascinating detail that they all preserve. Because if you've been a paralytic lying on a cot for your entire life, do you want to carry that with you? I'd be like, let's burn this thing, right? If you want me to carry it over to a burn pit, okay. But no, he says, carry it with you. And that's always fascinated me. And, the preacher's box, says, that the stories of your biggest pain are often the stories of God's biggest grace. And this man had to literally carry it around with him. His story is visible for all to see.
That would probably made it more authentic to the people
Yeah.
that weren't there, firsthand.
Yeah.
He's sitting there telling it. It doesn't say on this one, I can't don't tell people. Obviously, if he's making them carry it,
Yeah, this one he tells people.
he probably has to.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. I think that's actually part of the point of it is he wants people to ask him about the story. And he's visibly carrying it with him. Don't hide your biggest pain and God's biggest grace. And I think that's kind of a human thing, but especially an American thing, an American church thing, is we like to look all put together. But here we see that the ways that we have needed God's grace are probably some of the best ways to bring people to God's grace. I should write that down. That sounded good. Then we have Matthew. Yeah, let's talk about tax collectors, since this is the Gospel of Matthew. In verse 9, saw a man, Matthew, sitting in the tax booth, and he said, "Follow me." And Jesus reclined at table in the house. Behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. Reclining is just the way that they sat at their tables, by the way. Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? When he heard it, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. First off, that verse can be misused out of context. The sacrifice part is, again, he's talking to like Pharisees who think they've got it all figured out, right? So their religious concept is that they are sacrificing on behalf of God, basically. So he's talking about religious ritual in this context when he mentions sacrifice. And the whole thing about those, who are well, he's pointing out their biggest sin is that they think they've got it all figured out. Their sin is that they think they don't have sin, or that they are righteous, self-righteous. So in a little bit, you get the calling of the other 12 disciples, or the rest of the disciples, and you have a zealot and a tax collector. And zealots were, there's kind of weird details on how they got here, but their concept is that paying taxes to the Roman authority was a form of idolatry because of imagery, and they had some weird stuff about like Caesar Augustus is on the coins, and the details are largely immaterial, but their religious concept was it is a mortal sin to pay Roman taxes. And I am betraying, not temple taxes. They were okay with temple taxes, so Jewish taxes, but not Roman taxes. And they would rather die than pay Roman taxes because they thought it was like a mortal sin to their soul. And so they would go up into, hide in the mountains. And there are stories from history, like where the Romans track them down or tax collectors track them down, and they either fight to the death or like jump off mountains rather than pay the Roman tax. So this is a big deal, right? I just want you to get how big of a deal this is. This wasn't just, I don't like paying my taxes. This was, I would die for this belief. That's how strongly I believe in it. So that's a zealot. And a zealot would like nothing more than to kill a Jewish tax collector acting on behalf of the Romans.
The whole other end of the spectrum.
Yes. And so here's Matthew, a Jewish tax collector working on behalf of the Romans. And then you have the zealot in the same group of 12. Fascinating to me that Jesus is the only one bigger than both of those concepts.
Because they both follow.
Yes, they're following Jesus, and they're like, wait, really? That guy too? So you could not find any people further apart than that. That is, the zealot thinks that the tax collector has betrayed the Jewish people and would like to kill him. And the tax collector, knows that the zealot would like to stab him in the back and sees him as a traitor. So those were in the same group, spending all this time with Jesus. So whenever we have difficulties being together over our differences, I do harken back to Jesus being able to overcome the tax collector and the zealot in his same group of 12.
It's a good Thanksgiving verse.
That is. That is. Of course, then they killed Jesus. So there's that. But he came back. I think we'll call it there. I've got time for probably one or two questions if you've got any.
Why does he say don't tell people?
There's a lot of debate about that, so there's not like a clear answer. Probably, I have a tongue-in-cheek response to that,
I like those.
which is the best way to get someone to tell a story is to tell them not to tell it. So
Right.
that's what I think was going on. Now, don't tell anyone. That means, by the way. It also could be just to help. You need a Scot. We got a bunch of Scots today. We'll recognize them. To delay his eventual betrayal, to not build up too much fame. There are a lot of times, so like Jesus's hard teachings that we like the fox thing and the dead bury the dead thing. A lot of Jesus's hardest teachings come whenever there's a big crowd around him. And so Jesus intentionally gave hard teachings whenever people started to follow him just because of the stories they had heard. Whenever the crowd's heart wasn't right, he gave them the hard medicine. So that's also probably part of it, is not wanting people to just come because this guy was famous. So there's a lot of different things, but I'm still of the opinion that he wanted to. He was reverse psychology. But I bet it's a little bit of everything. We'll end our stream.